Hey guys, Richard Holdner here, and welcome to the channel. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff before we even get started. Hey, 4.60 4-valve guys, what is the ultimate intake manifold? Is it a long runner manifold that offers lots of low speed power? Is it a short runner manifold that offers lots of high speed power? What about an intake that offers both? Of course, I'm talking about the dual runner FR500. In this video, we're going to compare the dual runner FR500 magnesium intake manifold to the factory, albeit a mildly ported Cobra version, and we're going to take advantage of the short runner section of the FR500 because we want to run lots of RPM. Although we did do that, we didn't run quite as much as we wanted to because we ran into a valve float issue, but it still demonstrates the RPM potential of the short runner version of the FR500. Plus, we get to have the long runner version, so we can have lots and lots more low speed torque to go along with all of that top end power. And for you guys out there that are looking for the ultimate intake manifold, this particular manifold used in this test is also for sale, although it's not cheap. But I digress. Let's take a look at the power results when we ran the FR500 intake manifold versus the factory ported Cobra intake manifold, and then we added a few extra things to take full advantage of what it had to offer. To illustrate how ultimate the FR500 intake manifold is for the 4.6 liter 4-valve Cobra motor, we ran a test to demonstrate when you'd actually utilize very short runners, which the FR500 has. Now, it also has long runners because being a dual runner intake means it has both. So it has the short runner for very high RPM stuff, and then it also has longer runners to allow the intake manifold to improve low speed power production. Now, in all honesty, I've compared this manifold, and the long runner portion of this manifold doesn't make the power that the factory Cobra intake manifold does. But the short runner version of this manifold makes a ton more peak power. And in this instance, it really came into its own because we were looking for more RPM. And when you see the difference between what the short runner had to offer on the FR500, plus when you throw in the fact that it had long runners to add low speed power, which we didn't show in this particular test, but you'll see this thing makes a lot more peak power. And not only did we take advantage of it in NA trim, but we also added boost and nitrous to this thing, so it all worked out really well. Now, our test motor was a Sean Highland Motorsports. It was a 10-to-1 Cobra motor, so it had fairly high compression. It wasn't designed as a boost motor. Obviously, it wasn't a low compression deal, but it was a 10-to-1 motor, and we were going to run this motor both with naturally aspirated tests and obviously with supercharger and with nitrous. So it was 10-to-1. It had the Cobra crank. It had forged rods and forged pistons. It also had the small comp cam, and it was extreme energy 262 AH, and I'll go ahead and put the specs up here so you guys can check that out. But it's the mildest of the offerings for the 4-valve deal. It's a cam I like, and I've used a lot. I used it on this motor. We also used it on the 03 Cobra motor. You can take a look at those videos. They're up. And the cams themselves added quite a bit of power. Like on the 03 Cobra motor, it took us from 375-ish horsepower to 425 horsepower. So it added quite a bit of peak power. So they're good little cams. This particular test motor also had the 01 Cobra intake manifold that had been massaged and ported a bit by the guys at Sean Highland. We ran this thing with hooker headers. They're 1 5/8 long tubes with 3-inch collector extensions. This thing also had a set of ported heads. Now, my notes don't tell me this test was run long ago. They don't tell me which ported head it was, unfortunately, but they were ported 4-valve heads. I'm assuming that they were Cobra heads, but they might be something else. I know that I remember back when we tested this that they weren't extensively ported, so they weren't done, hogged out for kind of a maximum effort deal. They were probably just cleaned up, but I wanted to mention that because it was part of this test. So what we did was run this thing with in this case, back in the day, we ran it with a fast XFI management system, and then we tuned it to optimize the power and stuff, and run in this manner with the headers and the open throttle body. This combination produced 426 horsepower, and peak torque checked in at 394 foot-pounds of torque. So the first thing that we did, or one of the many tests, actually I should say that we did, because we tested a lot of different things on this, but one of the things that we did was put the FR500 intake manifold on here. And because I didn't have the actuators to switch between long runner and short runner with the ECU, We just did this manually. All I did was wire the throttles open so that it utilized the short runner version of this, and we ran it and tuned this thing accordingly. But I'll show you here's what happened when we ran this combination with the short runners on the magnesium dual runner FR500 intake manifold. And as you can see in red here compared to the blue, the peak power jumped from 426 horsepower all the way up to 483 or 4 horsepower. And you can see up near the top, you can start to see what would come to be valve float. Unfortunately, even though we had this modified head on this, we didn't have nearly enough valve spring for the combination of these camshafts from comp, or the RPM that we were running. This would come back to bite us later on. So with more valve spring, we could have run this thing even higher. I mean, this was sub 7,500 RPM, and for a 4-valve Ford motor, that's really, really easy to do. But as you can see, it lost power below 56 or 700 RPM, but picked up power for 1,500 RPM beyond that. So in a lot of cases, we'll do short runner manifolds, and it will pick up a little bit at the top and then sacrifice stuff down low. In this case, the trade-off is more than worth it, because in a 4-valve modular motor, you'll be running lots of RPM, especially if you cure this with a spring problem. You can run this thing out to 8,000 without any problem. These motors will easily do that. And with this short runner manifold, you'd be running from 6,000 to 8,000. You'd be definitely running in the sweet spot. And one thing we didn't show here, which would be an added benefit, kind of a value-added deal on this FR500 intake, is if we were to also run and actuate the long runner version of this, we would pick up even more low-speed torque compared to the factory manifold. So it's not going to do quite as well as the factory manifold down low, but it would do a lot better than it's doing here with just the short runner. So you kind of do have the best of both worlds. You have most of the torque offered by the factory manifold, and then a ton more high-speed power. But we'll show you now really why we did this and what we were looking for, why we actually wanted more RPM other than just adding more NA power. So the reason we wanted to run more engine speed on this particular motor and demonstrate what short runners do and what long runners do basically is to take advantage of the RPM potential with a Paxton centrifugal supercharger. There's a full video up, and I'll go ahead and if you take a look right here, I'll put a link to that video describing what we went through with the blower and the valve springs and eventually running nitrous on it, which I'm going to show you. So this was our test with the FR500 short runner manifold, and to remind you, here's what it looked like in comparison to the factory Cobra intake manifold. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and take the torque off here, because sometimes it gets confusing for guys. So these are just the horsepower curves. So the red is the stock manifold, the stock Cobra manifold, although this one was ported a little bit, and it made peak power out here at 6,100. And then the FR500 in short runner form went all the way out to 7,400, but we're starting to get into a little bit of valve flow. But the reason that we wanted to run the short runner is because we wanted to run more engine speed, and then we wanted to add this to it, which was a Paxton Novi supercharger. And I'll go ahead and put up the model of the Paxton. I think it was a Novi 2000. And you can see we made over 800 horsepower with it, and I'll put up the boost levels. We were starting the run at 4,500, so I'll show you what the boost was starting at 4,500 and then what the boost rose to at 7,000, because in typical centrifugal supercharger fashion, it starts out low and then increases with engine speed, which is why we wanted more engine speed, because we knew as we add engine speed, we're going to add boost and we're going to add power. But as you can see out here at the top, out past 7,000 RPM, the power was falling off. That's not because we ran out of supercharger or airflow or efficiency or anything. We just ran into valve float. And unfortunately, again, it was a little more pronounced when we had the blower on there. And the way that we cured all of this, because we were looking for a bigger power number, was that we just simply added nitrous to this thing, and we were able to get the power output that we wanted in the RPM range that we were limited to because of our valve spring problem. And you can see we ran it. It made more than 900 horsepower with a nitrous. we were basically using the nitrous as an intercooler, although it doesn't work very well for that because the nitrous as the intercooler, there's just not enough nitrous to offset, 900 or 800 and something horsepower worth of supercharged airflow going into the motor. Running 100 shot of nitrous just doesn't do enough to lower the charge temperature. It's super cool. It's negative 129 degrees. There's just not enough of it to act as an intercooler. So it's a much better idea to actually have an intercooler on this kind of combination running these kinds of boost levels. But then don't be afraid after that to add nitrous to it, because it's definitely going to help. But this is why we wanted more engine speed. The only problem is, in hindsight, we would have run more spring rate, and then we could have run even more engine speed. And then the thing that we would have had to worry about with a lot of these blowers, is often the case, is just with belt slippage. We would run into belt slippage unless we have, if you're running lots of RPM and you're running down, trying to maximize the output of the blower. Cog belts are kind of a good idea, because then you don't have to worry about belt slippage at all. You don't have to have like the extra tension on them, which can, maybe hurt bearings and things like that. So if you have a cog belt on it, you don't have to have a lot of tension on it. There's no belt slippage. You'll be able to get everything out of the blower that you want. And then if you're smarter than we were, you put enough valve spring in it to run the RPM that you want, and you combine all of those, and then you get good power. But one of the key elements in all of this is that FR500 manifold, and allowing the motor, even with fairly mild cams in it and mildly ported heads, the short runner manifold allowed this thing to continue to make power at higher and higher engine speeds to take advantage of what these other things had to offer. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, what do we learn from this experiment testing the FR500 magnesium dual runner intake manifold on our 4.6 liter Cobra motor? First of all, we realized that this is an impressive manifold. I mean, the short runner version allowed us to make a lot more power than the factory intake manifold. So right off the bat, it's a fairly effective manifold. I do like three things about this manifold. One, I like that it's magnesium because it's lightweight, which makes it awesome. It's also very visually appealing. If you open the hood and see this rather than a factory Cobra intake manifold, it looks even better. I also like the fact that it is a dual runner manifold. That makes it more effective. A short runner manifold is good, and if all I was running was lots of high RPM stuff, I would run a short runner manifold and take advantage of what that design had to offer. The cool thing about the FR500 is it's a very effective short runner manifold, as we saw from this combination. But it also has the long runner to go along with that, so you can add low speed power for good drivability, and it's unique. If you have an FR500 manifold under the hood of your Cobra or whatever it is, it's awesome. It's not going to be like everybody else. So make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. And if you're interested in this manifold, let me know. But please don't try to lowball this. I know what I got. This is a very special manifold. It's not a $500 or $1,000 manifold. Some of these manifolds are selling for $3,000 and $4,000. So they're very expensive. I want it to go to the right guy that knows what it is and knows what it's worth. But if you have something cool you'd like to trade for it, for instance, a Dodge Omni GLH Turbo, or maybe a Mazda 323 GTX, or some other kind of cool car that might speak to me, let me know. I'll put my email down here. You guys can take a look. Let's see what we got. Thanks for watching, guys.